All right. Hey, welcome to the Jesus Way podcast. This week there are three guys who are sitting together talking about what it means to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and ultimately to do the things that Jesus did. All right. Hey, welcome to the podcast. Great to have my friend Steve with us.
And our new friend Wayne.
And our new friend Wayne, yeah. So this is Wayne Stapleton. Wayne is the Vice President of Cultural Engagement and Emerging Leaders for the North American Baptist Conference, of which First Baptist Church is one of those churches. So Wayne, love having you.
Thank you.
We had Wayne preach at church this Sunday as we were talking about the way of the wider circle. So each week we have a different kind of way of Jesus that's not just necessarily one thing that he did, but kind of a pattern that Jesus lived by. And to me, one of the things about Jesus is the way that he not just pushed the circle wider, but flung open the doors for people to come to him. So, hey, let me just start by saying, so we assigned you the topic of, hey, would you preach on Jesus and the way of the wider circle? What was your first thought when you heard about that?
Did you give him the title too?
Yeah.
I received the title. I received the title. So I just had to figure out how to conform the message to the title.
That's what I'm asking you about.
And that's what I did. Well, and I've always been captivated by this encounter that Jesus had with the Samaritan woman for so many reasons. Like even I said in the message today, the whole idea that God ordained this interaction, the creator of the universe, saw this particular woman in her particular situation and set it up for Jesus to talk to her just meant so much. And it's like God sees, and it was just so powerful to me.
Yeah. Hey, in fact, why don't we start by talking about the passage from John 4 that you preached on? That was really great. Tell me about that term, Jesus particularized. Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's a term that I got from our church. We use it often the people that are doing like the Vantage Point 3 stuff. And the idea of particularizing is kind of just noticing the person for who they are, like looking them in the eye and letting them be their full selves, letting their story be their story, their circumstance be their circumstance, and speak to it. And that speaks into even things like curiosity and things like that, letting them be who they are, calling them out as a person. Who they are.
We make so many assumptions with the people we run into, whether we've known them or not. We just make a lot of assumptions about people by the way they look, the way they talk, or the way that, even their interests or whatever else it is. And sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper to get to that particularization, right?
You do. Matter of fact, between first and second service, I was meeting with the young adults in the counseling room.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about that a little bit. And the thing that I speculated, I feel like we're inundated with so much data now. Like we're assaulted with data that one of the ways we manage the data is like we just have to like kind of generalize.
Yeah, we categorize everything.
We have to compartmentalize everything and everybody.
In this category.
And you put people in categories, you assign yourself to a category.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of does damage to our ability to let people be who they are in their circumstance and situation. Because everything, and what's interesting though is like, so in my emerging leader work, one of the things that I do is every other month I meet with a group of emerging leaders in the Detroit area. And this last one we met with, we have a lunch and learn, and we decide ahead of time before the year starts about what topics we're going to talk about. So we talked about biblical manhood and womanhood, and what does that even mean?
Wow.
And today that's really a real serious issue, hot topic.
Yeah.
So one of the guys said in that meeting was, we need to particularize people more. And the idea behind that was kind of, there are all these stories of the alphabet and like how are people defining themselves? But how they come to those kinds of things, it isn't like general. It's like unique and specific.
Oh,
to
yeah,
them.
to their
And
story.
the way to
You mean how we develop our identity?
how we develop our identity, our gender identity,
Yeah.
whatever else. But the way you get to how can Jesus even speak to it isn't to treat somebody like a statistic or a group, but like, what's your story? What's your circumstance? How did that happen? And you know what I mean? To kind of, that's where the curiosity comes in. And,
It's funny, even with the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, and you probably like us, we've told that story, we've known that story for a very long time, but to really culturally get into it, no matter how many times I try to explain kind of the way you did this morning about the Samaritan versus the, the Jewish perspective and the woman in a patriarchal culture and all those, it's still hard for us to get our head around that and to know exactly what this strange interaction between Jesus and her was like, because it was probably freaky for her.
It probably was, and that's a really good point. I think that calls for work and I think sometimes I'm going to say a whole bunch of words you guys are going to be mad at me for, but like
Will we understand them?
well, not yet. Yeah, I'm sure you will. Like the notion of deconstruction, in some ways, there's a continuum of what that means and what that results. But what some people are trying to do is unpack the cultural baggage that comes along with their understandings of the text. And I think one of the challenges can be is that we basically apply our current day understanding to what the Bible is saying, instead of letting the Bible teach us what it means. At that time, that's like the grammatical historical method of interpreting.
Well, you gave a great example of that today. We hear of a woman who was with 5 husbands, and we think she was a sinful woman who hopped around from bed to bed. Probably not the case. Probably she was
discarded.
Discarded and probably abused and all kinds of things. And not again, like you brought up the point, not that she was devoid of who knows how all that worked.
She certainly needed forgiveness.
Yeah, but Jesus particularized her.
That's right.
And hey, how do you develop that curiosity? I confess I struggle with that sometimes. I don't know if I'm too quick to put people in categories or I don't know, but hard to slow down and do. But
yeah, I think part of it. One of the questions I think I put on the sheet on the back is how can you be less preoccupied?
Yeah.
And I think part of it sometimes is that
scrolling,
right? Or even when we're out in the world and engaging with people or whatever else, we have agendas and we have stuff and we're busy, and so like kind of our agenda and what we have to get done can kind of overshadow the people that come in our paths, and so part of it is like kind of maybe slowing down. You know, the John Mark Comer has a book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and that's a Dallas Willard quote. And I think part of that could also speak to, and I didn't read the book, but part of that could also speak to how we navigate the world is kind of, if we're not hurried, then we have more opportunities to see the people in front of us. But I think, I'm sorry, just piggybacking off, but even with curiosity, I think a part of it has to be married to the humility and the grace as well, too. Because sometimes we're not curious because we have a prideful way of looking at other people.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And that comes from maybe we're trying to lump them into those categories you talked about. Yeah, I think the question is just tell me more,
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me a little bit more about
Exactly.
I think a key piece to this, though, is putting ourselves in environments where we end up having people that come into our world that wouldn't normally be in our world. So like Jesus sitting at the well with this woman at noontime, odd time. I mean, obviously he's Jesus, like you said. He probably knew that interaction was coming. But at the end of the day, how often do we just settle into comfortable routines with the same old people doing the same old things, and our circle never gets any wider just because we haven't been put into places where it could become wider?
And I wonder, somebody prayed this morning before I preached. Was it you? Somebody prayed.
Was it good?
It was awesome.
That's probably me.
That was probably me. I thought it was
right. Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, one of the challenges I think with being pastoring, and you know this too, is that people aren't coming to church on Sunday morning to be given more stuff to do. Or to be loaded up with jobs.
No.
People are coming with hurt, with pain, with trauma, with, and they want to be lifted up. And I think sometimes if there isn't a sufficient kind of healing that people can experience, it's going to be hard for them to have space for other people who have those issues.
Absolutely.
And we can be better. We're only going to be better ministers as a church to the extent that we experience the ministry of Jesus for our own brokenness and woundedness. And obviously there's a mixture there, right? Sometimes you experience healing through helping others heal.
Absolutely.
But so it gets kind of, I know you maybe weren't thinking of going there, but I mean, this is kind of a challenge. With what does it mean to be the church?
Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest.
Right.
I'll give you 4 more tasks."
Right, exactly.
So we want to be people, and then he sends them out, and he has stuff to do. But there's that balance. So.
Right. Yeah.
I want to ask you about something else you mentioned in your message today. This idea that John shares with us that Jesus had to go through Samaria, and less by geography. It was definitely the shortest route, but people went around it. But more by mission. That he had to be there, and I guess what I got to thinking about is even you've been to Lodi before, but probably don't know it real well. Even a community like ours, not to dig into too much, it's got neighborhoods, and it's divided. We got tracts that go down the middle and tend to be kind of racially divided and socioeconomically divided, and I just think about for a Christian, how do we choose to go through those places that we just don't go?
Normally go.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any like just practical advice.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about, if this sermon was going to be 2 hours, was going to be the idea when.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. No, you're welcome. You're welcome, and I'm sure your whole church thinks. when we read that it was necessary, is because Jesus had such an intimate relationship with the Father that Jesus was dialed in.
Yeah.
He was like, he said, I only do what I see my Father doing. And so I think what we could learn from that is, discernment and spending time with God to just get a sense of, what is he calling us to do and where is he calling us to be? Because he could be leading us in those places. But also, even if we're just going around our normal day, if we try to practice or grow in our discernment, we can see how he's using those encounters that we have normally. So I think part of it is spending time with God and even asking him specifically things like, how do you want me to represent you in the world around me?
We've all had those moments where God prompts us to strike up a conversation with somebody, and it's like, I don't want to do this, God, right now, but I know you're prompting me, and being faithful to answer that, right? In that moment.
That's right.
One of the ones I've been just really burdened with for a while now is our Lode's got a really growing, predominantly Pakistani community that are Muslim, and it's growing, and it's been that population mostly been kind of in a couple small neighborhoods. It's starting to spread out a little bit more. But I think about, I've got this burden, but what do you do? So where do you? And for me, sometimes it's choosing the restaurant you eat at, or choosing the store that you shop at a little bit, or I don't know, or just making conversations. I don't know.
Exactly, and that's the area where curiosity has to be huge. Because you can't be like, okay, you're Muslim, so I know all about you.
And bro, that's so hard because I want to preach the gospel.
Right. Right. But one of the things I said second service, because I add a little bit to second service and first service, but
little known second service tip.
There's still a second service tip.
If
you're gonna hear me preach, you want to come to first service.
Same for both of us.
No, right. But one of the things though is that we get the opportunity to share our story and our message when we show our openness to hear other people's.
You got it.
And so if you're the only one talking in a conversation, it probably is not going to be an effective witness to the gospel. But if you let other people talk and share, and let the Holy Spirit guide how you even respond, you probably can place it in a way that
I think it's got to be this genuine curiosity.
Yeah.
I think so often we'll say the curious thing because we're trying to get to a certain place, whether it's sharing the gospel or whatever else it is. But we have to have some places where we can just genuinely be like, tell me more. And I don't have an agenda for what I'm going to do with that exactly, except the fact that I know every time you share something about you, and I have a way to reciprocate that we're building a relationship at that moment. We're building a genuine relationship.
And I think we have to be convinced, and I think we say we are theologically, but sometimes I wonder, we have our theological truths that we know we're supposed to believe, and then we have the ways we actually see the world and ourselves.
Yeah.
But regardless of how that person ever responds, they're no less loved by God.
Right.
And so if they're loved by God, then I think that gives room to be curious about who they are and how they got to be where they are. And regardless of how they respond to what you say, God doesn't love them less.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, that's so good. Hey, just a little confession. That's a real area of growth for me. And I think this is completely off the point, and then we'll move on. But I think even raising kids, for me, sometimes I wanted my kids to fit in this box in such a way that I wasn't curious enough to hear, even if they were a little outside of that box, because I don't know, maybe I didn't want to hear it or whatever it was. And I think I missed opportunities to really know what's going on with a person by forcing them into one of those boxes. So thank you for sharing about that. I don't really have a question in there, but other than to say thank you for bringing that up. That's a real area of growth for me.
And I appreciate that. I did think before, and I'm not saying I did this perfectly either, that one of the jobs we have as parents is to discern what God is doing and how God is doing it in their lives, and being ready for the fact of not only is it going to be different than us, but it's going to be different among however many kids we have.
Yeah.
Like God's doing something different in all of our kids.
Yeah, those kids are not only do they have personality and dispositions that are different than each other, but they're also growing up in a generation different than when we grew up.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's some things that they normalize, like that other people And not only that, I mean, geographically, there's
Yeah.
places. My kids were raised in Elk Grove. It's the most diverse city in California. My nieces and nephews grew up in Loomis, which is literally just across the Sacramento region.
Yeah.
It is the least diverse city
Wow.
in all of California. And there's some things that you just couldn't see coming because of that. And it's
Yeah.
just the nature of where they grew up and the time they grew up in. Even.
Yeah, and I do think as parents that are our age, we have to respect the fact that like being their digital native nature
Oh, yeah,
of them
totally.
is different than what we and we have to respect that difference
yeah.
and kind of honor the fact that they have different
Yeah.
kind of things bearing down on them
Yeah.
than what we did when we were growing up.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I didn't grow up in the age of social media.
Oh, I'll tell you.
Yeah. So, well, good to just be quiet and listen to them and listen to people sometimes. So,
Yeah.
hey, let's move on. Let's talk about this idea of cultural engagement.
Let's talk
You
about
are-
it.
You are the vice president.
Yeah, what are we supposed to be doing, man?
Cultural
You're doing it.
engagement and emerging leaders.
Yes.
Tell us first of all, a couple questions. Tell us a little bit about what that means, what you're doing, what we're seeing in our denomination. We want to learn about that. So talk to us about it. What can we learn?
So, cross-cultural, the idea of cross-cultural engagement comes from the idea of, on one hand, helping churches grow in their ability to engage cross-culturally. I think a lot of times when you don't have that kind of a lot of interaction cross-culturally, or if you notice, like a lot of times even people of different cultures, they assimilate into the culture of
Yeah,
the dominant church
absolutely.
anyway. I think, one of the things I want to do is help churches even develop language for what that looks like and how you engage people that are
Okay.
different culturally than you. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part too is that, you mentioned this morning, we're historically a German denomination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not as German as we were
Yeah,
before
not
in
hardly
many
at all.
ways. And
We had a
so,
hard
they had
time
to-
finding
they-
someone to make kuchen this morning.
Right.
They had to change the name of the church because World War II came.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
it's like,
you have that.
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I've seen my role doing, and I don't really know if this was the idea when I was given the role, but I encourage people that are not historically German or not even historically Anglo,
Yeah.
that this conference is a conference for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? And making space. And so sometimes I want to even elevate their voices and their influence in the conference to be more inclusive of who we are as a conference of churches. And so I do things like Zoom book studies and webinars that draw people in and help people have conversations with one another.
Okay.
It was interesting because there was a couple people I'm thinking of particularly, someone from Northern California here and somebody from the Midwest. They never met each other in person, but I had them together on a Zoom book study, and at the triennial they met each other in person for the first time.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it was super cool to see them kind of interact with one another.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. For a couple of pastors who have got a church that is interested in being involved with these things too,
Yeah.
what are some of the lessons you're learning? You even mentioned language. Can you think of even some examples, or what are maybe some churches in our conference doing
Their
where you see
practices.
this doing well that we could learn from?
Well, I like the thing what you're doing tonight about stories from the wider circle and like this emphasis. I think sometimes I've asked, and I noticed like between the two services, there's a significant. I mean, there's a reasonable amount of diversity ethnically and culturally here.
It reflects our
It's
community.
Yeah, which
It's
is
growing,
good.
and we're
Yeah.
thankful for
That's
that.
not always the case
Yeah, right.
in churches. One of the things I've said to Anglo pastors at predominantly Anglo churches when there's people, whether they're African American or Hispanic or African or whatever they are, is that when somebody is like really a minority, in terms of their representation in your
Right.
church,
Yeah,
but
sure.
they're attending your church,
Yes.
like recognize the fact that they're giving something up to be part of.
Yeah, right.
You're giving something up cultural to join what you're doing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, they're willingly doing it.
Yeah, right.
But I think like engaging them and talking with them and asking them what kinds of things, how do they feel encouraged? Are there areas we can grow? I think that's always helpful because if we're going to really be,
Yeah.
a house for all nations who
Right.
worship Jesus Christ, I think we want to invite that. The other thing I think would be maybe having some intentionality with regard to even discipleship and how people who are experiencing a call to minister, to leadership or
Yeah.
growth and spiritual maturity, how can they be part of, the leadership of the church, or how can they be discipled into it?
That's good.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Tell us. So, like you said, like our church is, the North American Baptist Conference is growing in diversity, but it's predominantly white denomination, historically white denomination. How's your experience been as a person of color leading in our denomination?
My experience has been really, really encouraging often. Not always. I've had a couple moments.
Says the bright side. The guy looking on the bright
I've had a couple moments. But to be completely honest with you, for the most part, well, first of all, I mean, I just want to be clear about and I said this before, I've taken on this kind of role everywhere I've been one way or another anyway. So it makes a lot of sense to me that in terms of ministry, it would be like this.
Yeah.
When I pastored the church in Warren for 9 years, it was predominantly white.
Okay.
And there was like a smaller, African-American contingent. But it was more like 80-20.
Okay.
You know what I mean in terms of percent.
Was that reflective of that community?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
Probably. But so I totally feel comfortable in this space, and I
Right.
feel like this is a calling
Yeah.
that I have. But there have been times when there are people who have kind of challenged, what I'm saying. And I literally think, and I'll be completely honest with you, this is going to go, for posterity. But the reality is, if I don't ruffle some people's feathers sometimes, then I'm probably not doing everything I'm supposed to be
Right.
doing.
Yeah.
Because I got to figure that if I'm saying stuff that I think God wants said, and my thing is, I'm not trying to create tension, but I also want us to feel like we're strong enough because of what Jesus has done for us to have real conversations in the body of Christ that we don't have to tiptoe around issues. I was at a church on the west side of the state of Michigan once, and so one of the things I do is I'll preach a sermon. Typically, it's a sermon about our oneness and how our oneness in the church is so important to our witness for Jesus. But then afterward, I'll have kind of a Q&A session. I've done that at Oak Hills before here. I've done that in other places. And this particular church was predominantly white. I think I had after church, we had a kind of a Q&A session. There were about 30 people, and 3 of them were African American. But the African American guy started weeping, talking about how he felt loved by the congregation, which was beautiful.
Yeah.
But he also said that he was a little frustrated that the church would tiptoe around some conversations and topics because they're scared to ruffle feathers.
Sure.
It's such a strange dynamic.
Yeah.
One of our absolute closest family friends up in Elk Grove was a black family. I mean, my kids have spent more nights at their house. And when the George Floyd thing, I didn't even know I was going to talk about this, but when the George Floyd thing went down, I called him. I said, can we get lunch? And it's sort of that genuine curiosity, let me hear it from you.
Yeah.
Let me hear how you're feeling about this. Help me process this as a white guy, even though we've been friends for decade and a half. Help me to hear it from your perspective, and then give me what you're. And obviously, it's not like he's going to have the black perspective or something like that.
But he has his.
Yeah, exactly. That's the
Yeah.
point. Is that he processes it different.
And I would say to that, this is the thing I think about when I hear what you're saying. Regardless of who the African American person is, and I don't know if everybody would agree with me about this, but this has been my vantage point, is there's something you have to intentionally think you're gonna do with who you are in the context of this world and culture.
Yeah.
How am I gonna handle being an African American man
Yeah.
in America? Am I gonna push it down and just say everybody we're all the same,
Right.
whatever else, or am I gonna kind of elevate it and make it my defining thing,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna hold it against people,
Right.
or I literally feel personally like God wants me to witness to something about what Jesus came to do, clearly as an African American man, among people that aren't always gonna be like me.
Yeah.
And I think that what he wants to do is beautiful, but I also think that it creates some conversations that can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But working toward the kind of thing we want in a family.
Yeah. Well, and the irony of my conversation with my friend is it was rooted in 15 years of friendship. So even if it's
Amen.
uncomfortable,
Amen.
it's not the kind of thing
No.
that's going to separate
You
us.
got something stronger
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
Which is, I think, what God has intended, right?
Yeah.
That's what God intends, is for us to be so strong because of what he's done for us that we can handle
those conversations.
those conversations.
Yeah, race has become such a heated and divisive issue that the church has fumbled the ball on it, probably in our actions and the way we've talked about it.
Yep.
And it's left a weaker church.
Yep.
And it's left a lot of people looking and saying, I don't want to be a part of that.
No.
Not that they even have to agree with everything,
Well,
but
not only has it left it a weaker church, and I know that some people don't like the term relevant, but it's made the church seem irrelevant.
It
And the reason
is.
why is because it almost seems like the church has nothing to say to the brokenness and the wounds, and because when the church has everything to say to it,
Yeah.
but we have to not be afraid to do it. And I just also want to say, and I haven't said this anywhere yet, but thank you for this. Isn't the first time I've been here.
that's right.
Because the first time I was here, we literally had that kind of conversation
We did.
in your room over here, and we had a bunch of people from all over NorCal,
Yeah.
and we talked about this. And so I'm glad that you're willing to host that.
Good.
I'm honored.
Well, we got a lot of room to grow on that, but we want to be a place that's relevant and real, and the world's watching, and we want to shine Christ's light in every way.
Well, and don't you think, though, is it fair to say if we were to be missionaries to somewhere else in the world, we would want the gospel to minister to all the broken places of that
Yes.
culture?
Absolutely.
And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to handle that same thing here.
Right.
The gospel should be speaking to all the broken places. Sometimes I think
Say
we're
it.
so in love with and idolatrous about America that we don't want to admit the brokenness in the places in America that we need the gospel to hit. And so we ignore it or gloss over it or get in an echo chamber where we pretend it's not there.
Right.
But then the church wonders, why doesn't it have influence in the greater culture? Well, they position themselves to not have influence in the greater culture by running away from the issues that the church needs to hear that there's a Jesus answer to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you're just not going to be invited back because you're hitting.
You know?
The reason
No.
the reason I say that, Wayne, is
Right.
because that's really challenging to me.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
don't want to be people that avoid hard things. We want to
Yeah.
we want to engage in those. And
Yeah.
so I really appreciate you kind of pushing us on that.
I-
Anything else on that topic?
Not on that topic. I just love the way you framed it around Revelation with this idea of every tribe and nation and people.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, America tends to focus on America and thinking,
Right.
when you recognize even our good friend Augusto, who represents this Latino culture, but he comes from Uruguay, and it gets you thinking about all the different incarnations of Latinos or Asians, or they all got a unique and individual story, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. And it's a mistake on our part. I can't speak for Latinos because I'm not one, but it's a mistake on our part to think all Latinos are like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, people from Puerto Rico are not like people from Cuba or not like people
right.
from Venezuela.
Mexican?
Yeah, I know.
Exactly. But to that point, I mean, even there's subcultures in the United States.
Totally.
Like Southern
Yeah,
white
of
people
course.
aren't
Oh,
the
yeah.
same as
Yeah.
white people from New England.
Yep.
Right.
And African Americans aren't the same all over the
Right.
place. And that's why we have to particularize
Particular.
Yeah,
people.
that's right.
Exactly.
Be curious. So
Yeah.
sounds good. Hey, we're going a little bit long today. I think that's okay. You also do ministry and do some work encouraging churches, same kind of thing with young leaders.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that? How can we be a church
What's
that's
wrong with
engaging?
these kids today?
These kids, no, right. Actually,
I got a list.
yeah, right.
So we were commissioning a gal this morning,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I look
Yeah.
at some of these
Right.
young kids, and I just think, oh, I'm so happy that they are who
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's new for us is Cam Roxborough and I are starting a cohort for emerging leaders. We're doing like missional training. It's called the Year of Equipping, and each month we're going to have a meeting with a group of, there's like going to be 13 or 14 emerging leaders from around the U.S. and Canada. And there's going to be 3 in-persons. We're in Vancouver, Detroit, and Chicago.
Okay, great.
So we're going to be pouring into them that way.
Love it.
I think what the local church can do kind of is just intentionally try to discern
Yeah.
who are the people in their late teens, early 20s who you see spiritual momentum
Yeah.
and movement in.
Yeah, we got.
and then how
we
can
see
you
that in.
right?
Yeah.
And then how can you kind of lean like doesn't Paul talk about fanning the flame?
Yeah, fanning the
Yeah.
flame.
You know,
That's
how
good.
can you fan the flame
Yeah.
for these younger people?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we will do our best on that. So, hey, any final words for just after your experience here at First Baptist Church of Lodi? And
It was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed, preaching. I enjoyed spending time with the people here. It was a lot of fun, and I'll look forward to hopefully not saying so much that I can't be invited back.
I know that was. I did not mean it like that.
No,
What I
right,
meant was
right,
you're giving me some hard stuff to
Yeah,
think
well,
about, which I appreciate. I really
Yeah.
appreciate.
Well, I do think that's my job.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I try to take my job fairly seriously. So, but I appreciate you inviting me, Glenn.
You bet. Yeah,
Honestly.
we're honored to have you, Wayne. And
Yeah.
thanks so much for being with us at church. Thanks for much for being with us on the Jesus Way podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Wayne Stapleton, we're so glad to have you. God bless. We'll see you soon. Don't forget, give us some comments, hit us up on all those kind of things, and we will be with you as we follow after the Jesus Way together.
See you next week.